You can be firm and succinct in your wisdom, but yet you're not harsh, loud, boastful, and resentful with your application of it. Well, good conduct was just nothing more than high moral character. We looked at Philippians 1:27, again, weakness, wise and prudent, gentleness of life. We quoted Albert Barnes, that's in your outlines. Oh, by the way, I did print out the actual handouts, but I left them evidently on my counter in the kitchen, so I'll bring those in next week, and you'll have the outline as well as the standard handout, so I apologize about that. And then we were talking about the characteristics of earthly wisdom. We talked about how it was envious and self-seeking, boastful, and lies about the truth. In other words, it tries to cloak itself as wisdom above, but it's not. It's wisdom that is, it's not from above, but it is earthly, carnal, and is demonic. It is of Satan. It's given there to sow discord, to lead us astray. So that's what James is referring to there. So we need to remember, what that kind of wisdom is, because the world is definitely full of that wisdom. And again, we can look, sometimes people want to look to people's success and look to them as wise and people that they need to emulate, but success does not necessarily mean that one is wise. It might just mean that one was fortunate in the things that they done, or the wisdom that they used was, like I say, that of a carnal wisdom, one that was kind of backstabbing, one that went about things a wrongful way. The outcome was, on the surface, a great thing, but behind the scenes it was not so. So now we want to look at godly wisdom. And godly wisdom is defined here by 8 characteristics. And the first one we see is that it is pure. If you look in your Greek lexicons, if you have one at home or whatnot, it says that the one that I used said it had a sense of innocence. In other words, there's nothing tainting, that there's no ulterior motives behind that wisdom. It is simply pure, godlike information. We can look to, I believe, 1 Timothy 5:22 and get a sense of this word. Over there in Paul's instructions to Timothy, he says, "Do not lay hands on anyone hastily, nor share in other people's sins. Keep yourself pure." So the emphasis there is to, again, be of the right stature of individual, to not get caught up in dubious things or things that would bring shame upon the gospel. Like I say, it's a sense of innocence, that no blame can be put forth there. That type of purity. So when something is pure, of course, then we know that it is not going to bring about any evil or anything like that. Next, we find out that it's then peaceable. James shares with us. This idea of peaceable is wisdom that will dispose a person to live in peace. And I think I changed it. That word in the outline, instead of dispose, think of it as incline. It will incline a man to live in peace with others. Okay, so this, again, looking to what the characteristics of earthly wisdom is, that boastfulness or envious, that's going to be the complete opposite of the God kind of wisdom. That God kind of wisdom is not going to be self-seeking. It's not going to be boastful. It's going to be one that brings about a peaceful attitude. And I would say usually when somebody approaches something from a peaceful advent, people were inclined to be more willing to hear and listen to what that individual may have to say, or follow that individual in the direction that the wisdom that he is sharing. We can also get a sense of this in Romans 14, verse 19. If you look over there, in his letter to the saints in Rome, Paul says, "Therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace, and the things by which one may edify another." So there's that idea. So that type of wisdom does not make for strife, does not make for envy, but it's wisdom that would bring about a peaceful nature of things, and it would edify people. It would be wisdom that would edify us as individuals. I think we also can look at another example to get another sense of this word peaceful, and that would be Hebrews 12:14, where the Hebrew writer records, "Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord." So if we don't pursue our wisdom in that fashion, I think we run a risk of putting our salvation in jeopardy. So we want to definitely be peaceable in our application of wisdom. Next I have here, godly wisdom does not bring about rowdiness or conflict. I know in the military, in a very, I hate to keep bringing up the military, but that's where I spent 28 and a half of my years. So most, or if not all, my examples will probably be from my background. It's a very competitive dog-eat-dog environment sometimes, and it is an environment of high conflict and kind of, there can not so much maybe rowdiness, but there can be stirring and murmuring in the background, if you will. And I would incline to say that is a type of rowdiness. So people who sow, earthly wisdom will also sow discord, because often that's a way for people to get others out of their way in the goal that they're trying to achieve. And so just be aware of that. So when, and just think that the opposite of that is to be, have that peacefulness about where you want to be inclusive, you want to draw everybody in, you want to look at it from an aspect, what's not best for me, but what's best for everybody around me in the application of my wisdom. Well, next we find out, and a lot of these are interrelated or correlate, but next we find out that godly wisdom is gentle. That would be mild, non-offensive or inoffensive, and temperate is the idea here, or the Greek sense. It also, in the Greek, in other verses, it's translated as moderation. So that's what James is trying to construe here with the word gentle. That it's moderate. It's not one way. It's not tilted on one side of the spectrum, nor is it on the other side. But I think it's in the center, well-grounded, where it needs to be, if I'm making sense. If we have a spectrum where, say, rowdiness is all the way over here on the one far side of the spectrum, well, the other side of the spectrum would be maybe a lackadaisical attitude, or one that does not bring about the outcome of what the application of wisdom should have brought about, because it was applied too mildly, if you will, that it wasn't applied in the correct way, if you will. Maybe the word nonchalant might be a good word. But we can apply it, we need to be gentle in our application. And I think if we remember in I think Paul says we need to season our speech with salt. That would be an application of being gentle. We need to be gentle in our speech and the gentle in our approach to individuals. One of my proof texts for this is 1 Timothy chapter 3. And I'll just start there in verse 1. It says, "Remind them to be subject to the rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, be peaceful, gentle, showing all humility to all men, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, and not covetousness." So we can get a sense there in his instruction there to Timothy of where I think gentleness falls in within that spectrum of behavior, if you will, by examining those. Oh, well, I read Titus 3:1-2, not Timothy, but 1-2. Sorry, but the first part of that I read, looking at my notes, is Titus 3:2, where it says, "Remind them to be subject to rulers, authorities, peaceful, gentle, showing all humility to all men." So gentleness and humility would be intertwined there as well. Sorry about that. Next we find that that godly wisdom is willing to yield. Means to persuadable or yielding, and I've got here, does not mean to be willing to yield to unrighteousness. That's not what's trying to be conveyed here. But the idea of willing to yield is, you ever talk to somebody or get into a debate with somebody, and they can be completely wrong, but they keep on debating it because they got to be the one who wins. They got to be the one who's right. They won't admit defeat, or what would you say? I think, look at it from a parent-child relationship, or if you're not a parent, look at it from maybe your relationship. Sometimes you see your children doing something and you don't interrupt them from doing it because it's better that they learn from their mistakes, so you let them go ahead and you yield from jumping into the situation. I think that's what is being meant, willing to yield. Sometimes when you're interacting with people, sometimes for them to get the point, to understand, sometimes we have to yield in the application of our wisdom, or we have to yield even though we shared with them what ought to happen. Maybe they just can't see it, the forest, because of the trees in front of them. And so we have to yield and let them learn for themselves. And I think that's what he's trying to convey here. It's not wisdom that is wrong or sinful, and it is not wisdom that is stiff, stern, or abstinent, or unyielding. And like I said, the complete opposite of that is you're going to do as I say, and that's the way it's going to be. And I don't think that's the way, not too many leaders are effective that way. It might get you to some short-term goals, but along the way you're going to lose your followers if that's the way you're imparting wisdom to people. I have an example. We can look to Paul. I didn't have it up here in my slide, but 1 Corinthians 9, verses 20 through 22, it's in the outline there. If we look there at Paul's example, I think this is a great example of somebody who yielding spirit, if you will. It says, "And to the Jews I became a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without the law, as without law, not being without law towards God, but under law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I became all things to all men, that I might be that I might by all means save some. And so you can imagine if Paul went into these situations with one frame of mind, and this is the way it's going to be, how effective would he have been? He would have been unyielding or unyielding in his application of the wisdom that, like he said, he was preaching the gospel. If he hadn't become all things to all men, would they, usually, that when you approach people from a standpoint that is not conducive, walls go up, communication breaks down. Would Paul would have been successful if he had been unyielding in the way he pursued in spreading the gospel? I don't think so. So, we need to, as we go out there and we sow the seed, we need to realize that it's not any one way that's going to be successful, but it's going to having a repertoire of ways to disseminate that information, and wisdom is where success comes to. And you have to be willing to yield to the situation and know when and how. Like I say, that's where wisdom comes about, through trials and application. We find how to be successful at that, if that's making sense. Next, we find out that it's to be merciful. It's the idea of merciful is disposed to show compassion towards others. This is a result, and I believe this is a result of godly wisdom. This idea of being merciful, or it can be a result of it. Look at Matthew 5, verse 7. Look at the Beatitudes. Christ says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Christ implored us to be merciful. And I think as we get older and we get wiser and we learn from our trials, I think that's that wisdom that comes upon us. We become merciful in the things that we do. We find also that wisdom, the God kind of wisdom, produces good fruit. We talked about the bad fruit that comes about by earthly wisdom. So obviously we should see a different type of fruit being produced by the God kind of wisdom. So godly wisdom produces actions that are just, benevolent, and kind, if you will. That would be some of the fruit that we should be seeing yielding from a God kind of wisdom. And I got Philippians 1:11 as a proof text for this here. And I'll begin reading it in there in verse 9, where it says, "And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and in all discernment, that you may approve all things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Christ, to the glory of and praise of God." So even here in Paul's, I think when you marry up that you abound more and more in knowledge and all discernment, you can see he's speaking of the fruit there, and that fruit will be fruits of righteousness when you achieve that level, if you will. So when you achieve that God kind of wisdom, it will produce good fruit. We also find that it's not partial, that it's without partiality. Wisdom that makes no distinction of persons, if you will. We can look to James chapter 2. Just go back one chapter there. And we can see exactly where James is coming from on partiality. It says, "My brethren, do you not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality? For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings in fine apparel, and there should also come a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes, and say to him, 'You sit here in a good place,' and say to the poor man, 'You sit there,' or 'Sit here on my footstool.' Have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" And so we can clearly see from James there where James is coming from on partiality. So godly wisdom is without discrimination. Godly wisdom will be consistent with all people and in all situations. So I think you can be partial also in your application of particular situations, if you will. For instance, you know you ought to do something, but if you don't, hypothetically, but say action X has to be should be applied because it's the right thing to do, but you know that that outcome may not produce the desire. In other words, maybe you should be yielding to a coworker because he's the better person for the job, but you feel that if you yield to it, it won't set you up for the next promotion. So what do? A God kind of wisdom would say, yield and do the right thing. But a earthly wisdom would say, you know what, I'm going to be number one. I'm going to, make sure that I get that job. I think that's where he's coming from partiality. And so, we need to make sure that our application of wisdom is always without partiality. And like I say, and it transcends across people as well as situations. And I think, this is our last one, without hypocrisy. In other words, it's wisdom that is sincere, not double-minded. It's not, it's going to be this way one day and it's going to be that way the next day. And it's not wisdom that is to be ashamed of. In other words, you're hesitant to do a particular thing or to impart some wisdom because maybe you're ashamed, and nor is it concealing. God kind of wisdom should always be out there. You should be willing to put it out there and not hide it away. It does not hide anything that is wrong. I guess a situation like this is, when we make mistakes, do we step up and we say, you know what, I made a mistake, that was my bad, I accept responsibility? Or do you just kind of put the head down and kind of stand and, see if somebody else steps up and takes the blame, or, let's see if they know who it was. That type of thing. Our wisdom should always be without hypocrisy. Also, out there discerning in the world, people know what Christians do and how they ought to behave. But then when you do the complete opposite, what do they label you as? They label you as a hypocrite. And so we did a whole lesson on that, so we're not going to dwell upon it. But just realize that godly wisdom is always without hypocrisy. So that's the lesson. I hope that it was of benefit to you. And we'll probably, I don't know if we'll do it next week. Maybe we'll give a break or whatnot. But we're also going to break down knowledge, what godly knowledge is, and then we'll also look at what godly understanding is. But I want to start by imparting or what the Scriptures say as far as what a God kind of wisdom is, so that we know what we need to be striving for. And that God kind of wisdom, we found that it is first pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, merciful, produces good fruits, it's without partiality, and it's without hypocrisy. So I implore you to adopt that type of wisdom in your life, and if you do, you'll be all the better for it, and you'll be where you need to be as a Christian. And if you do all those things, we have nothing to be worried about. We can approach His throne with confidence. And with that being said, I want to encourage you to, again, like I said this morning, I want to encourage you to exercise your God kind of wisdom. All things are here. All things are ready. Just come forward as we stand and sing the song that's been chosen.
I am resolved
no longer to linger, unto the world's delight.